Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and appreciator of big brain activities in general. And on this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. In this episode, we're going to continue our exploration and dramatic reading of the autobiography of an interesting person, Call Me Tennessee by Jeffrey Klitzner. Should you own a copy of this in softcover or PDF, they are available on Amazon.com. Or you can just put all these episodes on repeat and listen to my dulcet tones read to you this Jewish hobo's magical journeys through life. And so, in the last episode, Jeff had gotten back to Israel and was dealing drugs again. So now we're picking up in chapter 28, The Wall. I was on cruise control during my shift and when I was off, except that I would have to start my day by cleaning up after the stupid Israeli who was working at night and insisted on playing some awful techno music. I could deal with all kinds of music, even techno, but his stuff was just horrid. I would help him expedite orders from the bar at night, not because I was paid to, but when I have to clean up after people, I try to make sure the mess isn't too bad. All in all, things were going good, except the restaurant wasn't making any money once Israel went after the people firing mortars across the border, and the police started sending mounted patrols to the beach. Nobody was to be seen on the streets at night. Some nights I wouldn't even make an order of fries, and I would be forced to close early. The strip club had closed, and Arabs were running amok in the streets, while the police were all over my boss and me. I wasn't selling enough hash to make any money or extra smoke. I tried running stuff to Jerusalem. I didn't tell anybody I was coming down, just hopped on a bus. When I got off, security went all up in my grill, going through my bag. They even checked my hat. I guess, for them, the appearance of checking was important, when all they had to do was pat me down. I was carrying 4 sticks in one pocket, 2 in my sock, and 1 more mixed in with my cigarettes. I got the royal, "We are watching you, and we will get you one day," speech in Hebrew and in English. I walked into the red light district in Jerusalem and sold it all in 20 minutes to 3 dudes from England on their gap year. I had never met them, so I took a hefty sum and left without any exchange of names or numbers. I returned to Tel Aviv, mentioned what happened, and decided all hell was going to break loose soon. Sure enough, my boss had hired some fat chick from England and told me to train her. I did what I could, but there wasn't much to work with. The other guy working was a guy from the bar, and he was fine. In fact, I wish I had gotten to work with him more, since he was one of my roommates. Anyways, I was getting sloppy in preparing food, forgetting a few things from time to time, extras like grilled onions or peppers. Normally this wasn't a big deal, but it happened to normally be the boss's food. I actually made decent tips for a guy. So this guy came by, talking about his new restaurant, and he just kept talking. I told him I pretty much made everything on the menu from scratch, except the burgers. Those came pre-made. I was proud of my hot sauce, my wings, all my other sauces, and my fried chicken batter was better than that guy from Kentucky. We were talking, and it was a very slow night. My boss came by, and I mentioned we were probably a little low on gas. I told him I didn't know anything about the gas when he hired me, but I figured since we were open longer, the gas would run out faster. Somehow, the next day, we had almost run out, so he ordered some, but yelled at me for not telling him ahead of time. Then this guy showed up again, talking about his damn restaurant, and he offered me a job at it when it opened in August. I was like, "Thanks, but I'm happy." When my boss heard, he said I should take it. I didn't think it was going to be open longer than a month. It's going to be overstaffed, prices way too high with high overhead costs, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. Well, the next night, I was working with the new girl, running orders back and forth, also doing the register and helping with whatever. Things got interesting when a couple of Arab punks came in to order food and paid for stuff. I wasn't paying too much attention, but when the last guy tried to pay for one drink with $100 after his buddies had ordered and paid with hundreds, I told him I couldn't break it. He needed to go next door, and he left. I didn't think anything of it until the boss counted the money at the end of the night. It turns out there were 3 counterfeit bills in the till. I'm not sure if it was the Arabs, but logic tells me it was. For all I know, the girl could have easily taken the money in. I got yelled at like a bitch, and I got paid with the counterfeit money. I was told I had 2 weeks left and to pack up and get out of the apartment, but to be sure to keep on working. I tried getting another job, but since I was a little drunk the night before the interview, the trial went shaky at first, and at the end I had some problems with the Hebrew. I tried a few other places, but the pay sucked and the pace was more than I wanted. My grandfather was sick, I just wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up. I worked for the next 2 weeks and told my roommate how to make all the dressings, batters, and marinades. I went back to Jerusalem and tried to get into a yeshiva after talking to my religious friend in Tel Aviv. For a people who want to educate and love everybody Jewish, once they heard I had kind of a nervous breakdown and I wasn't rich, they gave me the cold shoulder. I wanted nothing to do with religious people. I'd rather be with a bunch of bacon-eating Jews that drive on the Sabbath than the Orthodox Jews who wouldn't help a little old lady who fell crossing the street. I had enough of Israel. It chewed me up and spat me out. I had to get an emergency passport to leave the country because having just become an Israeli citizen, they wouldn't let me leave on my American passport. So I got my old roommate, the lowlander, to help me expedite the whole thing. I kept hearing my mother bitch about having to try to take care of my grandfather. The two of them never got along, and so I thought, well, shit, I got nothing to do until August. I can come back and work for Dude when his restaurant opens. I'll at least get paid good. In the meantime, I could do some helping my grandfather out. This meant I was flying back to America, through Brussels to Miami, and then up to Delray Beach. It just so happens the European Union head office is located in Brussels. My stopover was uneventful, except for a great conversation with some French girl, and me marking my territory on every one of those pink buildings. Every end-of-the-world scenario I've ever heard of starts with a united Europe. I decided to mark my territory and have my own claim to fame, if arrested. I was open about it, even took a dump in front of the main lobby doors at 6 in the morning. It was light out, people were walking by, but no reaction. They just let me be. I guess they're used to that kind of thing on the continent. I arrived in sunny South Florida on a rainy day, but no matter. I was out of the grasp of those filthy, stinking camel turd chewing Muslims once again, and I had lived. Chapter 29, A Helping Hand. Upon returning to sunny South Florida, it was my goal to help my grandfather out some. I had to see what was going on due to the mixed reports I was hearing from my mother and her twin sister. I got back to God's waiting room and discovered my grandfather was actually in better spirits than when I had left. He had moved into a 2-bedroom condo about 5 minutes from my aunt. He had advanced from the Weather Channel to the Classic Movie Channel, and he was due to start physical therapy for his hands. About 2 or 3 days later, he received orders to be placed on oxygen. Not surprising, since he had his first cigarette at age 9, and when he was in the Navy at the age of 16, cigarettes were a part of his daily rations. His hearing had been mostly gone for years, but we understood each other. Blame it on years of bluffing each other in gin. On a side note, knocking in gin is for sissies. We had many a game waiting on the same cards. His physical therapist, a nice lady named Robin, said she might be able to find me a little work. Now at this point, I gave Joe a call since he lived up the road in Fort Lickerdale, and I had a couple Cuban cigars on hand. We partook of the sights and tossed back a couple of rum runners and coconut monkey heads on the beach while smoking those fine hand-rolled stogies. Soon, I found the Starbucks nearby, and after a while, I got to know some regulars the way I always do. Anyways, between food and therapy, my grandfather spent most of his time on the computer playing solitaire or sleeping in his chair. I was soon asked to help some guy with a bad back do therapy at his home, in his pool. His daughter called and asked me how much. I told her $15 to $20 an hour. She said, "How about $40? I said, okay, and showed up the next day. The old guy was cool, and I pretty much just had to walk him around the pool for an hour or help him to practice treading water. So an hour in the sun got me $40, 2 to 3 times a week. The rest of the time, I would hang out at the Starbucks with what I dubbed the Starbucks Mafia. We had a bookie, a nice guy with access to an internet gambling site in Costa Rica and connections in Chicago. We also had a slumlord with a good-looking daughter who was just a little too young for me, but nice to look at. We had a Jewish lawyer who had 3 clients and a wife who was in her 20s. There was the cougar, who was living off her ex-husband's alimony and her own net worth. Then there was me, Tennessee, a guy who enjoyed a little cough syrup in his coffee, fresh out of the pool, a little Seagram 7 in the Pike's Place brew. Everybody around knew my cough syrup in the coffee wasn't top shelf, but it wasn't bottom rung. So from time to time, we switched up brands and all pitched in for a bottle. We would sit around for a good 2 or 3 hours, talking sports, money, alcohol, business, drugs, and women. I was hooked up with random work by the lady who had the boutique next door. She would ask if I could fix her satellite radio or her computers from time to time. I would receive margaritas in exchange for my hard work. Once again, life made sense, basking in the sunshine with a little bit of random conversations on life, love, and, of course, the occasional joint. I was back to living outside the law with my access to random cash poker games in the back room of a bar within walking distance of my grandfather's condo. Now, this bar was 21 and up only, and it was by far the biggest redneck joint in a 250-mile radius. It was a dive with $2 drafts and a weird collection of old people. I was having a good time. Most days I would go over to my aunt's to watch TV and smoke cigarettes, or hit the bar up and talk to the 90-year-old guy with terminal lung cancer smoking through his tracheotomy. He was cool as hell, doing shots of Jack and chain-smoking filterless Camels, and he had no problems grabbing any piece of tail that walked by him. "Just reach out and grab," he would say. "What's the worst that could happen? I'll be dead in a month." Me and him understood that we really had nothing to fear but death, and both of us had come to grips with our lives, so the notion of death didn't scare us. My days with my grandfather, though, didn't see much action, outside of driving to Costco for muffins or going out for the early bird special somewhere. I enjoyed the time, but really wasn't doing way too much, as he was okay living by himself. We had plans to go to Chicago for a cousin's wedding, and I still had that job in Israel I could snag, but figured it really wasn't a big deal. I could do whatever I wanted. Me and the mafia were cool with each other, enough to gossip about all the extremely rich people walking around us, to the point that we would play Pass the Cougar. What is that, you may ask? It's where you make stupid passes at hot older chicks just to see how big an asshole you can be and still get laid. The grass was green enough on that side to make me think I needed to just stay where I was for as long as possible. Now, one day, during a vigorous win for me in a round of Pass the Cougar, I chanced to look out the window and see my cougar's husband pulling into the driveway. Using all my magic ninja skills of evasion, I had to climb out the window of a 30-foot balcony, work my way down to the ground, and make my run for the gate. After telling that tale, I was given the elite status of the craziest SOB to ever run the gauntlet of that Starbucks, which entitled me to, well, nothing outside of free coffee and access to a couple of random jobs. Most were legit, some weren't. One in particular, somebody had keyed a car, and it would cost more to repair the paint job than the car was worth. I was told to send the kid who did it a message, which really wasn't that hard. When I found him, I twisted his arm and made him lick all the bird poop off a statue in the park across the street. It was also funny because the kid was one of those small penis, wife-beating, swine-molesting Muslims who threatened me with jihad after I called Muhammad nothing more than a flying carpet thief who would rob caravans and, for sport, cut the heads off people who complained. Apparently, he thought it was my car he was king, so the fool decided to key a pink 56 Cadillac Coupe de Ville because I trash-talked his prophet. It was fun, and after I did that, I really had nothing left to prove to anybody around West Palm. My grandfather was doing good, and he let me do most of the driving, but on occasion I would let him drive. It was just good old-fashioned fun, hanging out with him on Sundays, driving up or down the coast, and grabbing the occasional bite to eat on the beach. I had found something as close to a normal life as I had known in years. Things were going good. Both of my friends were back from the battlefields. I was having some fun in the sun, and when people harassed me about not having a real job, I would simply point out that I was taking care of my grandfather, and that would suffice. I didn't expect anything in return. I just felt it was the right thing to do. If that meant sacrificing a career I didn't want or need, what's the big deal? Then people would say, "Why is it that you don't care if you have money or not?" My reply was simple. I'd lived my life hardcore and kind of figured I'd be dead at this point, so every day I was living on borrowed time. Plus, I'd already been living like a king, and having no money or a ton of money wasn't getting in the way of that. It was time to go to Chicago for the wedding, so we figured we'd stay in Memphis for a day or two and then head up north to Chicago. My grandfather's health agreed with the plan, and away we went north. Chapter 30. Chicago done did it. On the way up north, we stopped in Memphis to pick up my mother and kick back for a few days before my cousin's wedding. I dropped my grandfather off at my uncle's, and I went to Lunchbox's pad for a few days. His girlfriend was working her way through the police academy at the time, and he was bouncing at a strip club. We hung out a bit, talked, I got my drink on once or twice, went to the shooting range with his girlfriend, went through a couple clips. I really don't like guns. I don't mind them, but if I'm going to kill somebody, I would rather have it be personal, like a knife or my foot. After my short visit, we hit the road and made good time to Chicago. My mother went to sleep in the back seat. My grandfather was chilling with his oxygen tank, and I just focused on getting up the road without getting a ticket. Not sure why I was in such a hurry. Oh yeah, my mother was in the car, and I couldn't deal with her talking. Really, it never stops, and it's horrible. We made it to Chicago, where we got to the hotel. I went for a walk and a place to buy some cigarettes, just anything to not deal with Minda. I went to a cousin's for dinner, and the next day we went to a Cubs game with my cousins. I had a few old styles, the traditional beer to have at Wrigley, and had a good time with the youngsters who were home from college. That night we went to the rehearsal dinner, and it wasn't bad at all, considering I hate weddings. The next day, the wedding was cool, but my grandfather wasn't feeling too well, so I didn't get trashed or anything. I socialized with the family, a few guests, nothing out of line. The day we were supposed to leave, my grandfather was not really feeling any better, and my mother had a flight to catch. In talking with my cousins, I decided to get my mother to the airport, and then I called an ambulance to take my grandfather to the hospital. After a few hours in the ER, it turns out that between the VA, his other hospital visits, and the fact that he never understood the diagnosis, he needed a valve replacement, and his oxygen levels were out of whack. I spent the night at the hospital and called the uncles with updates and stuff. The doc wanted to do surgery, and so my uncles came in for the talk with the doctor because I didn't want to be held responsible for his well-being. My grandfather asked me what I thought. I told him to wait until my uncles came in to make a decision, but the choice was his. Did he want to live or just wait to die? I could tell that without his wife, he was just waiting to die anyway. What could I tell him to do? So he had the surgery. I started staying over at my cousin's house and going up to the hospital during the days, spending most of my time waiting for the doctors to make their rounds and grabbing some food in the cafeteria. It was pretty good food, and on occasion I would go out for lunch. I even met a girl there, and when I stayed downtown once or twice, she stopped by after her shift was over. My cousins were coming up just to visit. They also understood how rough it was for me, probably more than I did. After a while, I would go off for long walks, grab some food, go to some Cubs games, just to get away and clear my head. It wasn't easy, seeing my grandfather so helpless, and not really being able to do anything about it. He was recovering slowly, so next came the decision on where he should do his rehab at: Florida, Chicago, or Memphis. It was decided he should go back to Memphis. The problem was we really had no place to stay. I could stay at my friend's house while he was rehabbing, but all of our stuff was in Florida. It was also determined that he should move back to Memphis permanently. It was rough to try to make decisions that I shouldn't really be having to make, and then having to be the update machine on his condition. In total, I couldn't tell you how long I was in Chicago, but it felt like forever. My torture was taking its toll, both mental and physical. The worst part was people trying to give me praise for being a great person for taking care of my grandfather. At the same time, I was having to use his credit card just to survive. You know, eating and stuff, and the area his hospital was located in wasn't cheap. Plus, it was really just one of those things that happened, and I really didn't plan on having to be the one doing all that stuff. I tried to be responsible, but the praise for me was harsh. I was having a hard time helping him in and out of bed so he could use the bathroom. I was helping, but at the same time I also felt he would probably be better off with someone trained for this stuff. Eventually, my aunt came up to fly back with him, and I was going to drive back to Memphis. Alone, no problem. It was all gravy. So on the way back, I took my time. I stayed at a hotel, picked up a bottle that night, ordered a pizza, and tried to relax. It wasn't easy. My anxiety level was going through the roof, and about a month before we left, my whole left side had gone numb. I'd gone to the hospital, and they thought maybe I had a stroke. They weren't sure. All I knew was that I wanted to get away, crawl into a hole, and never come out. People kept saying, "It's so good that you're willing to do this," like I had a choice. I suppose I had a choice, but it really wasn't. I didn't want to take care of him, but nobody else was going to do it. I really did want my own life, but I couldn't have one, which made the praise just hurt more because I didn't want to help at this point. I felt like I can't do this, but I have to. Around this time, I got back to Memphis, and my grandfather was in his rehab place. I admit it, I went to the bottle to escape the reality that had become my life. I had nothing going on at this time positive. I was looking for a place for my grandfather to live, and my mother decided to join the bandwagon. I couldn't take any of this crap. I spent time at Starbucks and thought, this can't be the rest of my life. I was having a tough time trying to get a grip onto the reality of what life was at this point. I wanted more, and this was all I had. My grandfather was on the mend, going to a nursing home on temporary status before moving into an apartment. It was time for me to go back to Florida and pack up the sweet life to head back to Memphis for good. It was like there was some kind of strange gravitational pull that always forced me back to that town I hated and loved at the same time. I loved it for what it could be, and I hated it for what it was. It was kind of like myself. And that sentiment I have personally noticed and warned people about. If you're watching this and you live in Memphis, get out of there. That place will eat you alive. It's like a swirling black vortex that you try to get out and it pulls you back. And you try to get out, it pulls you back. It'll find some bullshit reason to drag you back into that abyss that it's built upon. Now, I have successfully escaped its orbit. It took some work, though, and it did try to kill me while I was there, and it took several of my friends before they could escape. Jeff's a great example. He ran, and it kept sucking him back in. But as may be clear at this point, the autobiography's already talked about Jeff having problems, this yo-yo effect of everything being good and then everything being shit. How he's content with what he's have and then realizing he doesn't have anything. And what he do? He self-medicated to numb himself to the effects of that. Or like his thoughts in Starbucks at the end of the chapter. He says, this can't be all there is to my life. Well, you do actually have to build a life. Yeah, you can snatch and grab as you run by things, but if you don't hold on to anything, if you don't set down any roots, you're gonna have these feelings come back at you. A fulfilling life does take commitment to yourself, to your ideals, to your activities, to the people around you. I mean, Jeff's already talked about how many times his family's bailed him out of this situation, that situation, gave him money for this, gave him money for that, gave him jobs for this, a place to stay, yada, yada, yada. And yet his commitment to them outside of his grandparents wasn't really there. So what if you don't like your family? Well, is it a type of dislike where you have to be away from them? Or is it just kind of annoying, but then remember the fact that you're probably also kind of annoying? Unless you're one of my dear, dear friends, in which case you're wonderful and beautiful and perfect, as God made you. So if that resonates with you, find something to stabilize yourself. Because stability, it might look boring, it might not look exciting, but it's nice, let me tell you that. I've always had more stability than Jeff. And while he's got a lot more highs than I do, I haven't kept going on this merry-go-round of self-loathing. I'm a pretty happy guy. I'm just stuck in a world run by satanic pedophiles that Jeff's probably related to. But enough about that. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to like and subscribe, and please drop your thoughts, your reactions in the comments below. And if you think there's friends of yours that would enjoy this, share this around. And so that's what I got for you today, my dear, dear friends. Until next time, I wish you nothing but the best. To the 90-year-old guy with terminal lung cancer, smoking through his tracheotomy.